Today on Light of the Word with Pastor Ray.
Here in verse 8, every one of these churches he goes back to chapter 1, one of the identifiers of who Jesus is. And here for Smyrna, he says to this church in their letter, "These things says the first and the last who was dead and came to life." These things says the first and the last who was dead and came to life. He's speaking to a church that he's saying, be faithful to the point of death.
Open your heart to us, Lord, so we can know your word. We come before you, Jesus. Speak to our hearts as we discover your love for us. How wide, how deep, how far. Pour into us so we can learn to follow. One surrender at a time. You have made the way for us to know you, a path that's straight and bright. By the light of the word.
Would you be faithful to God no matter what could happen to you? Even if you were threatened with being killed, would you still claim Jesus Christ as your Savior? Today, Pastor Ray will tell you about the testimony of Polycarp, the pastor of the Church of Smyrna. Polycarp was questioned about his faith, and he wouldn't denounce God for anything, including being burned at the stake. It's a perfect example for you today of what strong faith looks like, standing up for God, no matter the cost. Well, let's join Pastor Ray in the book of Revelation chapter 2 for today's edition of Light of the Word.
Christian, God always prepares you and speaks before. And sometimes we don't even recognize it. Sometimes we don't even see it. And here, Polycarp, he's getting this letter, but he's not going to fully see it. Oh, the waves of persecution obviously are already rolling. John's on the island of Patmos because of his witness, right? And Nero's already burned Rome and blamed it on the Christians. Israel has already been sacked. Jerusalem's already been destroyed. Christians are being dispersed. But the waves that are going to come are increasing. And so we sit and go, wow, mostly the persecution would spread, and wherever you spread, you were fine. But now here they are, they're tracking, they're chasing them across the whole land to search out these Christians during this time of these waves of persecution that we read from world history. And so John, suffering persecution, writes to his disciple. He can write something that he relates to. And there's a place that in a study like this, nobody knows except those that's been there. I talk to some brothers in the ministry, and as they talk to me, I go, oh, nobody knows except those who know. And they shake their head. And there's a place, remember Pastor Joe Foch telling the story of there's a woman in the church whose husband had cancer, and a brutal cancer, and cancer took him. And he went to minister, and he goes, I was ministering the best I could. I was giving the scriptures. I poured my heart out, and my heart was sincere. And she was there. The widow now was receiving. And then walked in a widow whose husband had cancer and passed away a year earlier. And when she walked in, the two of them looked at each other, and they said no word, and they simply embraced each other and said, I know. And there's a place when we suffer through these things, as we'll read through the crushing and the fragrance that we admit that other people we can relate to and go, I know. And we do. And so here's John, he's writing to Polycarp, probably, when Jesus says into the Church of Smyrna, he goes, Church of Smyrna? That's Polycarp. This is my mentee. Oh. So here's the story of Polycarp. You read it in the Fox's Book of Martyr, written by John Fox, who would go and research the history and reading the early church fathers and these type of things. But The wave of persecution would continue, and there would come around 155, 165 AD, the emperor at the time, not the same one that put John on Patmos, but this one, enough of this Christianity. Shut this down. Go find this pastor Polycarp, he's in Smyrna, and have him renounce. That's all you got to do, just renounce. And we'll go through some of the progressions here in a minute of how that played out. I want to tell you about the pastor first. Go find him, tell him renounce, and all will be well. So the word comes that they're coming for you, Polycarp, and the church convinces him, look, maybe this is just going to blow over. Maybe it's just a moment in time. How about if we take you, we're going to whisk you away, take you out to the farm, you stay there, and we'll just see if this blows over. Well, it's not going to blow over, but they take him out to the farm. They come to the church. Where is he? They take one of the young men of the church. Where is he? They torture the young man until he says he's out of the farm. And so they go, and they're going to go head to the farm to get Polycarp. The church knows it. They send advance notice. Polycarp, they're coming for you. And to this point, Polycarp, I'm not leaving. Fox's Book of Martyr, recorded in the history of the early church, says what Polycarp did do was he prepared a meal for the captors that were coming. Reminds me of Psalm 23. I prepare a table in the face of my enemies. So he prepared a meal in the face of his enemies for when they came. He then took a nap as he waited. Can I say this to everyone? When you know whose hand you're in, when you know you're in the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end, you'll be able to rest through anything. Amen. And there's a word here in this Church of Smyrna that when we grab this, there's a power that says to us, you know what? I know you could. You chose not to. But I'll still praise you in the storm. And you will be able to rest even in the hardest of hardness. Sickness, illness, all these type of things. He naps. They show up. He feeds them the meal. He says, may I have 1 hour to pray? They says, you may, which turned into 2, and because that's the man that he was. But when the time comes to take him away, the soldiers say, we're so sorry. It grieves us that we have to do this. And he says, do what you must. So they took him. I don't know if it was this arena that was in Smyrna, which seated 20,000. That tells you how magnificent this town is. I think Camden Yards holds like 32,000. Imagine building a 20,000 arena back then, 2,000 years ago. And so they're going to take him, and if he'll renounce, he'll live. So they take him, say renounce. He won't. But here's the words recorded. These 86 years I have served my master, and he has been faithful every day. Should I at the last blaspheme his holy name? To renounce him would be blasphemous to him. They said, then to the stake you go, and we will burn you at the stake. To which he says, you deliver me to the flame that burns but for an hour, and before you stands the flame that burns without end. They didn't have the cords to tie him at that moment. And he says, you don't need cords. I'm not going anywhere. I'll just stay here. And he stayed there at his stake without rope holding him there. They lit the fire to burn him, and the fire wasn't quenching him, so they gave the word to pierce him. And when they pierced him, the blood was so great it poured out of his body, and it quenched the fire. So in the end, they rekindled it, and they killed him through the spear, and then they killed him as such. What's amazing about the whole thing is, so enraged would they be at a later time, they would go find 1,500 other Christians, bring them into the same arena, and not one of them would renounce or recant their testimony. They went and found 800 and brought them in all at once, and not one of them would recant their testimony, and all of them would take the martyr's death. And the thing of the beauty of the whole thing is, because there is one man of faith, They said that when they pierced him, there was an aroma that could be smelled through the whole arena. Take it for what that's worth. But that's what, when we read this word here, Smyrna, it was a myrrh. It's where the word myrrh comes from. And it had a fragrance about it, but they say when myrrh is crushed, that's when the fragrance gives its greatest eminence. And that's interesting to me as I think of Matthew chapter 2, verse 11. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshiped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts of gold. That's how the Lord provided for Jehovah Jireh. He provides for Mary and Joseph while they were to Egypt. Frankincense, that was an incense for the priesthood. And then myrrh, it was an incense as plant-like that was used for death and embalming. And so here we have Jesus at the time of his death in John 19, and Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. It was an embalming fluid. Mark 15, verse 23, then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he did not take it. Myrrh was used as a painkiller, and here's the significance for you and me. Jesus would not take the myrrh. He was not going to take anything that was going to numb the pain. When he took your sin and my sin, he took the full wrath, 100% with no numbing. And I think there's a word for all of us as the world gives us so many things to numb ourselves with. And yet the Lord would say, this isn't the place. There's going to be a fragrance that's poured out when you endure and take these things. And it's interesting to me when you read Isaiah 60, speaking of when Jesus sets up his kingdom on earth there, the millennial, the multitude of camels shall cover your land, the dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and incense, and they shall proclaim the praises of the Lord. No myrrh. Gold and incense, yes, but no myrrh. Because the first time Jesus came, he came as a suffering servant for you and I. The second time he's going to come, he's coming as the conquering king. And this is who is seated on the throne for us and taking it. But here in verse 8, every one of these churches, he goes back to chapter 1, one of the identifiers of who Jesus is. And here for Smyrna, he says to this church in their letter, these things says the first and the last who was dead and came to life. These things says the first and the last who was dead and came to life. He's speaking to a church that he's saying, be faithful to the point of death. But what is significant for me, he's making the appointment. I am the one who was dead and came to life. I'm giving you a calling to endure even to the point of death. You be faithful. And you know what? I wouldn't doubt there's any of us here today that has not been in this crisis of faith. And the crisis of faith isn't that we doubt our faith. The crisis of faith that I'm talking of is the crisis because of our faith, because we continue to endure, because we won't renounce, because we stay and keep walking the walk and we won't walk away. But we all come to this place that I call the crisis of faith, where I sit there and go, you're the Alpha and the Omega. You're the beginning and the end. You're the one that was dead and came to life. You're everything in between. You have the power to change this right now. But you won't. You're not. You know, any of these situations in our life, I bring myself to and I go, you could change this right now. I bring myself to this place. You allow this right now. And there's this crisis of faith where we can come to and go, you have the power. Why aren't you? And why won't you? And there's this power that will come with, you know what, Lord, I'm still going to just praise you in the storm. Jeremy Camp, that great song that he sings, he knows. And he's going to say this here in verse 9. I know your works. I know your tribulation. I know the poverty that you experience from these things. And I think of Casting Crowns. What a song. I mean, Jeremy Camp, Casting Crowns, a little side note there. There's just something special about those ministries. There's something special upon them. I rarely go to the concerts. I'll just listen to them on the radio or get the CD. But I've been to Jeremy Camp and I've been to Casting Crowns, and I go, man, this is like just a church worship service. It's not a concert, somebody singing to me. And there's this place, and it just reminds me, I would have thought by now that you would have stepped in to save the day. But once again, I say amen, and it's still raining. And many times there's a place. And yet God's going to speak to this church. He's speaking to a Polycarp, what's coming. Polycarp could say, but you're going to exempt me, right? John's writing from Patmos. I think Polycarp would go, no. He could have saved and spared John all these type of things. He could save and spare us all these type of things. But once again, we say amen, and it's still raining. And that will be a crisis of faith. But then there comes this place that God will speak. Verse 9, I know. So even in the midst of all of it, I know. I know your works, your tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue. God knows. Whatever you might be experiencing, whatever your struggle is, he knows. But he's going to give this word. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the beginning. I'm everything in between. I know the tribulation, the pressing that you're in. And I come to that place over and over when I think of this and the place that I'm in. These 86 years I've served my master, and he's been faithful every day. Should I at last blaspheme his holy name? And when someone wants to say, why do you still have your faith when all that you have and all these things that you struggle and whatnot, we come all these years, I've served my master, and he has been faithful every day. Should I at last blaspheme his holy name? I know your tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. It's interesting when we'll study Laodicea, that's the church that thought they were rich. And God says, man, you're wretched, you're naked, and you're poor. And here's a church, Smyrna, who the whole world is saying poverty. They could feel poverty, and I'll explain why. And yet he says, but you're rich. You're richer than any other. Do you realize, church, those who are faithful, us, as you continue on in your faith, do you realize you are richer than Elon Musk? Do you realize you're richer than Bezos and Gates and all these likes? Because what they have is this temporal thing that's passing, but they don't have the fullness that we have this promise before us. But the world could say, we could feel, man, I'm poor. And listen to this. This is how the progression goes, because they were literally, the word for poverty here is the abject poverty. You know, we have a poverty line that we call in the United States. When you live below this line, we consider it poverty. But still below that line is, they call it a poverty because your wealth is enough for food, clothing, and shelter. That's the poverty line. When you're above that, then you have the wealth for other things of a car and better clothing and better food and, you know, fill in the blanks. This word here for poverty, it was the total poverty. It was what we call abject poverty, meaning I don't even have enough for food and clothing. This is how poor this was, because here's the progression as we look at what they're going through and follow through the history, and we can see a progression that can happen in America. We see a progression that can happen in each of our lives as we make certain decisions. But it starts with Smyrna has this temple to Greek gods, Zeus, Apollo, etc. But the Greek worship is fading fast. But here comes the next thing, and this is 196 BC. They build this temple, Diorama, and it was that Rome is the great, it's our loyalty to Rome. We're going to be the city of loyalty to Rome. That's what we're going to be known for outside of Rome. We're the city of Rome. Well, so they build that temple, and people started to come and worship and come, this is my loyalty to Rome. And in 26 AD, so now we're getting into the time of Jesus, this city beat out 10 other cities, 11 total, or 12 total, but they were in a competition, kind of like the Olympic thing. We're going to host the Olympics. Remember when we were trying to get Baltimore, Washington and host the Olympics, and we lost out to whoever it may be? Well, they were in the same place. We want to build the temple to Tiberius, a name for a Caesar, for the emperor. They won. So now they get the temple to the Greeks. They get the temple to the Roman loyalty. Now they got a temple that's for the Roman God. And it starts with voluntary. You can come and you can voluntarily worship. Well, as these Caesars start becoming, Caesar is Lord, it doesn't become optional anymore. It becomes a mandatory. You will come and you will worship. And then what you must do once a year is you will come to the temple, you will come into the temple, you will take incense and you will sprinkle it onto the altar and make a vow that Caesar is Lord. Well, now who's not going to do it? The Christians. This is actual archaeological discovery here. This is about 250 AD. The Imperial Roman government issue certificate of confirmation conforming that Caesar is Lord and Rome, loyalty to Rome. You would come in once a year, sprinkle that incense, and then you would say, Caesar is Lord, and you would get this certificate. Then you could go to get a job at the National Security Agency. You could go get a job at Southwest Airlines. You could go get a job at a defense contractor. You fill in the blank. Nothing's changed. You could get a job at the school. And when you did, they would go, let me see your certificate of loyalty. Then you would take your certificate and you would show them, and you would get your employment. Or if you owned a business, Rome would come through, let's see your certificate of loyalty. Oh, there it is. We have a certificate of occupancy. That's how we are allowed to be in this building, because we meet all the fire code and emergency evacuation and these type of things. No certificate, no building. No certificate there, no business. How many dads are in this place today? I want you to think about this. You go home, you walk in, you say to your wife, you got your children running around, I couldn't do it. And the wife would know exactly what you're saying. Well, what does this mean? It means tomorrow when I go to work, they'll say there's no work for you. Well, could you start a carpenter business? No, I can't. Because Rome will come and say, where's your certificate? And here these people are in this Smyrna Christian faith saying, I can't sprinkle the incense and I cannot say Caesar is Lord. And they would come into absolute poverty. Not below the poverty level, enough for food, clothing, and shelter. They would come to, we don't eat tomorrow because we are not going to have money. And when you don't have money, you can say, why don't you just move? How far are you going to move without money? How far are you going to move without a provision? And yet now there's this whole church, there's all of these people who would be willing, as we just read, Polycarp. And there's the picture. Polycarp, the years before, was willing to be crushed and sent out a fragrance. And then 1500s would go, I ain't sprinkling the pinch. I'm not going to say Caesar is Lord. Then there would be 800 the next time around. I'm not going to sprinkle a pinch. I'm not going to put it on the incense. I am not going to say Caesar is Lord. As I said it, biblical Christianity must preach.
You have made the way for us to know you, a path that's straight and right. By the light of the world.
You've been listening to Light of the Word. Pastor Ray's digging into the book of Revelation. As there's much to learn from this prophetic book of the Bible, Jesus is described in a peculiar way in this book. He has white hair and flaming eyes. He sounds fierce, but someone to be amazed by and revered. Revelation is a classic case of showing God's power, His authority, and how everything and everyone is in subjection to Him. His heart is for people to choose and accept His saving grace, but not everyone is willing to do so. And with that, there are grave consequences. If anything, this book of the Bible is a striking reminder that people need to be saved from themselves, and Jesus is the only way. Don't let an opportunity be missed to tell your friends, your neighbors, or your co-workers about Jesus' salvation. They may not want to hear it, but to reject what Jesus is offering is deadly. If you'd like to talk with us about today's teachings, you can call 443-995-3282. That's 443-995-3282. We have additional resources on our website, including a great devotional that goes alongside this Revelation series. Find out more at lightoftheword.info. This has been Light of the Word, illuminating the heart of God.
You have made